Well, greetings, everyone, and welcome to our series, Voices of LGBTQ Faith Freedom. My name is Charles Watson Jr., and I'm the Director of Education at BJC. I'm excited to have our first guest in our series, Reverend Fred Davie, joining me today. Reverend Davie is a Senior Strategic Advisor to the President at Union Theological Seminary, where he has served as the Executive Vice President for a decade. He is also a Senior Advisor on Racial Equity at Interfaith America. Mr. Davie also served on President Obama's transition team and was appointed by President Obama to the White House Council on Faith-Based and Neighborhood Partnerships. Reverend Davie, welcome, and we're glad that you could join us for this discussion today.
Thank you, Charles. I'm honored to have been invited by BJC to be a part of this conversation.
All right. So today starts Pride Month, and I wanted you to tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of how you got to Union, how you got to where you are right now.
Sure. Well, thank you again. So I graduated from Yale Divinity School 40 years ago this year and came to New York straight from Yale Divinity School 40 years ago this year. And I feel like in some ways I've come full circle because at Yale Divinity School, I met a young woman by the name of Serene Jones. And over those years, over 30 years, we maintained an acquaintance and friendship. Once I came to New York, I worked my first 6 years or so in nonprofits. And then I went to work in government as a political appointee for a number of public officials, H. Carmel Call at the New York City Board of Education, David Dinkins. I was chief of staff to a deputy mayor in the Dinkins administration, and then deputy borough president of Manhattan. So I did, 6 years or so in nonprofits, then another 6 years in government. And then I had to decide whether, if I wanted to stay in government and politics or if I wanted to do something else. I had been a grantee of the Ford Foundation for a couple of my projects and work. I've been in touch with people there. There was a position open at Ford. I went to Ford then for a number of years as the program officer for faith-based community development, which was a wonderful opportunity. And then worked 9 years for a national nonprofit where I did a number of national programs working with different White Houses. I did a little bit of work with the Clinton White House, a lot of work with the Bush White House, which ironically got me introduced to the Obama folks while he was still in the Senate. Young man went to work for Obama, Joshua Dubois, who's a name you may know. He went to work for Obama, and I met Joshua through a mutual acquaintance. He thought it might be good if I briefed the staff there on this sort of national project we had going, working with faith community-based organizations on prisoner reentry. And that got me engaged with them. And so I did that work up until 2009. Then I went to work for the Arcus Foundation, which funds in social justice, LGBTQ issues, environmental issues. And it was in 2000, and I was with them for a couple of years. And then my friend Serene Jones, who came to be president at Union Seminary, she'd been my classmate at Yale, she reached out and said, would you consider coming and joining me at Union? And the time seemed right. That was late 2011, and I stayed there as executive vice president for 10 years, and just most recently became, as you mentioned, senior strategic advisor to the president. So that's the full circle in a couple of minutes.
Yeah, that's a great full circle, and thanks for giving that to us. And so, why did you first get involved with religious freedom work? You've talked about how you had connections and done some things, but why is it that you first got involved with religious freedom work?
Right. So I'd like to maybe start with thinking about it as interfaith work in the first order. And that even was preceded by ecumenical work. So I grew up in a little town in North Carolina called Belmont. It's a small town, about 5,000 people when I was growing up. It was segregated until I was 10 and officially integrated, and schools integrated and the whole bit. But there were a couple of things that went on there that I think helped to form me. One was that we went to church. Now, I went to church in an unusual way because I was a Presbyterian.
Okay.
Generations of Presbyterian on my grandmother's side. There weren't that many Black Presbyterians in the South. So that immediately sparked a little bit of interest, like, sort of we have the AMEs, we have the AMEZs, we have the Baptists, we have all those white churches. I didn't know what they were at the time. There's a big Catholic presence in Belmont. There was and still is. And then there was this Black Presbyterian church that was very different from my friends AME, AMEZ, and Baptist churches. So that sparked some beginning of an understanding that there are these different expressions of faith, but there was a lot of ecumenical effort among the Black denominations, as you can imagine, and Black people in that little town, even with our Black Catholics, to address issues of inequality. So that opened my mind very early on to variety, difference, diversity. There was another thing, since we're in Pride Month, that was really sort of interesting about my little town, is that in our several Black villages or enclaves, there were out gay people, mainly gay men, and they belonged to families, so we all knew them. And they were cousins and brothers and uncles. And the churches were generally open to their presence, even in their sometimes what we call then cross-dressing ways. So that opened me then also to this intersection of faith and identity. I rolled along like everybody as a teenager kid. I went to church because I had to. I kind of enjoyed it from time to time. I got in trouble from time to time doing things I shouldn't have done. And then when I got to college, I went to Greensboro College in Greensboro, North Carolina, where I'm happy to serve as a trustee now, United Methodist School. It was just slightly maybe left of center when I was there, a little bit more than moderate, predominantly white when I was there. And they required religion. They required like maybe 6 hours of religion. And I took an Old Testament course in the prophets, and it sort of opened my eyes up to faith and scripture in ways that I never had before. And then I had an Old Testament course that was partly taught by a rabbi, my first sort of introduction to Judaism. So then I moved beyond just this kind of ecumenical notion of faith to a more interfaith notion of faith, with the introduction of this rabbi and Judaism in my life at like 18, 19 years old, having come from, this really small southern town. By the time I finished college with a major in political science, and I'd done a lot of work in religion, talking to my Old Testament professor who became a mentor, he suggested seminary. I went to seminary first to Union Presbyterian in Richmond, Virginia. Totally opened my eyes up to a completely different world. 354 students then at Union Presbyterian. There were two of us there who was African-American. One of them was off in a middle year. So I found myself in this world that I just it was completely foreign. I didn't completely understand. I didn't really know what theological education was all about, et cetera. But all the seeds and the foundations were there. I went to Yale. That sort of was an experience that really expanded my horizons. And so it just was in my DNA, in my formation, to be open to diversity in religion, to be open to the ways in which religion intersects with identity, and to see religion. And as another sort of piece of my upbringing, I knew religion. I can honestly say I never ever grew up, never. And now maybe I missed it, and I checked this with my sisters and brothers.
Right.
I never had heard an anti-gay sermon the entire time of my childhood and when I was growing up. I just didn't. And I checked it with I said, now, did I miss something? And they can't recall. It just wasn't in the milieu of our particular expression of Christianity in my little town. I don't remember hearing any anti-gay theological or religious sentiments at Greensboro College. I don't remember hearing any at Union Seminary in Richmond. Now, I know later a number of several professors at Union became the leaders of the opposition to full inclusion of gay people in the Presbyterian Church. But during my time, that just wasn't, I checking to see if I was in denial, it wasn't front and center on anyone's agenda. It was later, after I got to New York, the real push for LGBT inclusion and LGBT civil rights, particularly in New York and other places, that the backlash from the church really began to hit me and become a part of my experience. So, so I had the foundations for first ecumenical interaction, then later interfaith interaction, and then this intersection of faith and identity. And I actually found faith as a source of inspiration for coming into my full identity, with some barriers here and there, rather than something that I had to see as a detriment to it.
Reverend Dave, that's interesting. I grew up in a southern town, maybe 5,000 people in the county, 5,000 to 10,000 people in the town.
Right.
And so when you said you didn't hear any anti-gay sermons, I think I would second that, but I think it was almost like the don't ask, don't tell policy. So they didn't speak about it.
Right.
It's like, okay, we know this, but we're not dealing with
Right.
this in that way. But you said something that kind of sparked my interest. And so I have two questions in my mind here, and I think I'm gonna go this way first. You kind of mentioned something about your identity and your theology. So my question to you is, how has your identity influenced your theology, and how has your theology influenced your identity?
Right. So I think my theology and my socialization influence my ability to gradually fully live into my identity. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. So I firmly believe that, in my little Presbyterian church, in that ecumenical community in Belmont, I formed a theology, or theologies. I didn't know that's what I was doing. But I was developing an understanding of God and religion and their relevance to my life. And as an out gay man who is ordained in the Presbyterian Church, faith, because I think the way I experienced it early on, really became a source of strength and support and foundation for me. Also, my mother, God rest her soul, was probably one of the most non-judgmental people I ever knew. So she had gay friends when I was growing up. Now, one person was our cousin, but other people were just friends. And you grew up in a southern town, people just come by, they sit on the front porch and talk to you. They come over and, they'll have a bite to eat from time to time. That happened with my mother's gay friends. Now, that's not to say I didn't have like anxiety around coming out. And it's not to say that I didn't go through a lot of denial, both with myself and with other people, but I knew two things. I knew that somehow my experience of the divine would let me be nothing else but my complete and full self. And I remember reading Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Oppressed and understanding the sort of built-in negative self-concepts we have. And if we're going to have true freedom and true learning, we have to sort of deconstruct, that sort of negative internal stuff. I remember reading Paul Tillich's The Courage to Be and embracing non-being as being and being able to find power in that, because God is capable of turning non-being into being. What the world sees as not being of value, God can transform and often embraces it as value. All of those things, from my experience with my mom, her friends, and church, and how we experienced it right through seminary, and the affirmations I got just let me know that I was going to be able to step into my full being. So my theology influenced my identity. My theology helped me to come out. Now, one could say that because, and you know, I had to deal with it too as a dark-skinned Black man in the South, you know, because in addition to the segregation and racism, we still deal with colorism in our own communities and all the kind of negative encoding that produces, and how do you work through all of that? So one could say that in search for my full identity, that influenced how I saw and experienced theology too. What I can say is that it was all it's been a liberating process for me all along. It has set me free. I did a sermon on this at the First Presbyterian Church, Brooklyn Heights, probably about 15 years ago with the Reverend Dr. Paul Smith. And at the end of the sermon, I sung this song, I won't sing it now, saying, God has smiled on me. He has set me free. God has set me free. And I believe that's what my theology has done for me and my identity. It has set me free. And I think my identity went in search of a theology, perhaps, that would do that.
I hear what you are saying there. To me, it's a beautiful story because it allowed you to be who you are and come of age of who you are. And so for me, that's why I fight for religious freedom, because I just feel like if true freedom is being able to learn, change your mind, get deeper into who you are, what you believe. And without religious freedom, then we would be stuck in the same spot. We wouldn't be able to evolve, change, and learn. I think it was Muhammad Ali who said, a man that's 30 and 50 that thinks the same when he's 50 has wasted 20 years. And so for me, religious freedom gives us that opportunity to do that. So thanks for sharing that part of the story with you. And so you've kind of talked about a little bit of little conflict, you know, with the community. You talked about some of how growing up as a Black man in the South, there were things that were going on there. So I would like to ask you, how do you see faith freedom and LGBTQ rights as complementing each other? And have they ever been in conflict with each other? If you don't mind me adding that a little bit at the end.
God knows they've been in conflict with each other and still are.
Yes,
because I think most of the opposition to, or at least a good portion of the opposition to the full inclusion of LGBTQ folks has come from the faith community. And I'm in dialogue with different with different expressions of the faith communities here in the US, for example, around the Equality Act that's before the Congress. And I'm not sure what's going to happen to it with this Congress, but there were conversations early on with different religious groups. And the Equality Act, for people who don't know, is an act that would, before Congress, that would simply outlaw discrimination against LGBTQ folks in the same way that we outlaw discrimination based on other protected classes like race and gender and national origin, religion, etc. So clearly religion, it is a source, particularly organized religion, of serious opposition to LGBTQ people stepping into their full citizenship here in this country and around the world. I mean, one of the things that we didn't talk about is that, and I'm not here representing the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, but I am a commissioner on the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom. In fact, I'm headed to Nigeria on Saturday under the auspices of this U.S. Commission. And it is, the effort there is to promote religious freedom of religion or belief or no belief around the world, to get the U.S. government to do that in its foreign policy. Mm-hmm. And there's a clear intersection between that work and LGBTQ folks internationally, because often gay people internationally are not, in certain nations around the world, are not able to even exercise their free expression of religion simply because they're gay. So the commission addresses that. In this country, we aren't stopped as gay people from being faithful people, from showing up as faithful people In certain denominations, clearly, United Methodists are wrestling with this. Gay people are LGBTQ folks, queer folks are saying, look, we want to show up here as full participants in this and other denominations. And that freedom is being denied them. And so, and they're doing it as people of faith, children of the church, creatures of God, who are like many people before, are trying to step into their own completeness. I'm reading the 1619 Project book. I'm reading a couple of other books on sort of early slavery, and you see the ways through the 1619 Project and these other historical accounts of how religion played a role in dehumanizing. It's interesting, both a liberating role, but also a role in dehumanizing African Americans. You're just simply sons of Ham. God created you as slave people, and there's sort of no other destination for you. And yet, as people of faith, as people came through the Black church and other Black expressions of religion that were just beginning to uncover and talk about, project at Interfaith America on Black interfaith. But Black people, through a religious experience, overcame the burden that was, in fact, the dehumanization that was placed on them, placed on us by religious traditions. In the same way, the LGBTQ community, which is why I find it hard sometimes to understand how some of my Black siblings who grew up, generations in this country don't get this. But LGBTQ folks are saying, as people, as creatures of God, we simply want to be able to enjoy the blessings of liberty just like everybody else. And we believe that is God calling us into our full being. So the church, it's a mixed story, clearly, and the church still, the faith traditions still are a major source of oppression for LGBTQ folks, but they are also a major source of inspiration as well. And that's sort of the paradox. So we got a lot of work to do, but I'm confident with people of goodwill, of all traditions, who are committed to freedom for all people, where LGBTQ folks or around religion and faith or gender, we'll find a way. The hour may be dark from time to time, but I believe we will triumph in the end.
It's amazing that you say that. You have the faith in the people of faith and people in faith traditions. I find myself having faith in those that don't have a faith tradition that help us along too, in many ways. Whether we're talking about how we were doing the civil rights, they were the ones that were away from the church or away from religion that were helpful too. And so it just balancing that both ways. And again, it goes to freedom of religion and valuing those who have faith traditions, those who don't have faith traditions, who are fighting for humanity on the right side of humanity as we talk through these things. So I know you've seen that as well on that. And so for now, we talk about what have been threats and maybe some dangers and what things happened to you as you were growing up and finding your identity. What do you think is the greatest threat to religious freedom domestically and also around the world today?
So I think religious extremism. I think the threat to religious freedom probably comes from religion itself. In the US, there's this growing Christian nationalism. We're going to have candidates on the ballot who are unashamed of the notion that they should be able to impose their Christian belief on governments, on people, their fairly narrow interpretation of Christianity. One candidate who's going to be the gubernatorial nominee for one party in a major state has said Christianity can't impose, the government can't impose religion on us, but we can impose religion on the government. And within these extremist expressions, both here and abroad, there's very little openness or tolerance or acceptance of a diversity of opinion. That's extremely dangerous. We have seen through history, and we see in current times, just look at the Taliban, what it means to impose a narrow interpretation of faith traditions on larger populations, as opposed to trying to work to live in diverse, pluralistic settings and countries in the world that we are. One of the things I'm proud about in terms of working for and with Interfaith America is that at its core, Interfaith America, which used to be Interfaith Youth Corps, is about promoting and building religious diversity in a pluralistic society. Ibu Patel, who is the president and founder of Interfaith America, has made the point and has highlighted to the country that this is the world's first attempt at having a religiously diverse democracy. And so it's really important, I think, if we're going to have religious freedom, that we all band together and say, okay, we're going to create a space where all people can give expression to their faith, even those people we don't necessarily agree with, but those folks aren't going to impose their narrow view of religion on the rest of us. Now, where the rub is, particularly when it comes to the LGBTQ issue in this Pride Month, when you get to that point, is that there are people who are saying that gay people are full human beings and should fully participate in society like the rest of us, is imposing a religious point of view. Because from their point of view, gay people should not have full rights and perhaps aren't fully human as they understand humanity to be, and are not fully creatures of God, but are perhaps creatures from the dark side. I mean, that kind of thought, those kinds of thought processes and that kind of understanding of religion prevails. So, but we have to create a space where we can have that kind of dialogue, those kinds of debates, push for rights, a place to push for rights, and not have the power of the state coming upon any of us to suppress that as it does in other parts of the world. That's what we've got. That's what we've got to protect.
Thank you for that. You mentioned Christian nationalism. Of course, BJC has been sort of leading the fight in Christians against Christian nationalism. I think we probably drop in the comments on our Facebook live here about our January 6th report. And for those who haven't heard about Christians against Christian nationalism, definitely check out the link that will probably be dropped in there. You mentioned a couple of things. You said about those in the faith tradition that don't see those in the LGBTQ community as fully human. And I think that's what upsets me the most about people that are claiming faith behind that, is because you can replace that with Black people, with women, with you've been wrong so many times, putting another segment of our society, another human being in those places. Why do you continue to, come with the same stuff? I'm a child of hip hop, so I used to hate when people sound like somebody else biting somebody's rhymes, and I get tired of our brothers and sisters that continue to bite each other, bite the same rhyme, throw out the same lyrics, and then try to say it's something new. You also mentioned about not letting faith overrun government or take over government in that way. I think it was Judge Wendell Griffin that I first heard say, many Christians are against Sharia law, or against what would happen for our Muslim brothers and sisters, scared of them because they think they were going to take over the government. Yet they want to practice Sharia law in a Christian way. They want to not practice what the Constitution and what the Supreme Court has said. they want to put their religion over the government, but they don't see it in that same way.
Right. Well, I'm concerned that this Supreme Court might want to do the same thing. So we've got the BJC and your peer organizations and all the rest of us we have a lot of work to do.
We do.
Because I do think that there are people who, and I think there are people on the court who, again, have a very, very particularistic, conditioned view of faith and Christianity and what it means. And I think there's going to be a unrelenting effort to try to make that the sort of way of the land, in spite of the fact that we become a more diverse and particularly religious diverse country by the day. And perhaps that's what's the most frightening. It is the diversity that is causing this rise in nationalism and Christian nationalism. And those of us who, I'm a child of the Bible, and those of us who remember Jesus at the well with the Samaritan woman, I mean, if we just think about that, she was a Samaritan, the most hated population at that time in that particular context, and she was a woman, and he was a man. And there he was in the presence of someone who was considered the lowest of the low in society, and he embraced and claimed her as his own, as one worthy of his attention and engagement. What more do we need, particularly as Christians, by way of example of how we are to broaden this effort and bring more people in than that story? And we keep getting it wrong because we want to circumscribe folks as opposed to liberating them and giving them sort of full expression of who God intended them to be.
Well, I want to end this on a positive note. So the final question I have for you, Reverend Davie, is what's your vision of the world that you're working towards? What's your vision of the world that you're working towards, whether it be in this context or what context you have?
Well, again, as a Christian, I think one who was raised in the Christian tradition, the beloved community is one that works for me. I realize it's not a concept or an idea that is prevalent in all religions, but the notion where these forces that are seemed at war can somehow lay down their weapons and find a way to peace. The metaphor in the Bible is the lion and the lamb, or beating swords in the plowshares. I want to see us all geared to working toward, creating communities of peace, communities of liberation and freedom, address issues of the degradation of our environment. Just say we love the world because we love ourselves and we love other people. And our primary orientation is going to be giving expression to that love so that we all can live, and as scripture says, and do it abundantly. That human flourishing is what I'm after and what I want to commit my life to as a person of faith. I'm willing to join forces with anybody who's got that as an agenda.
Yes. How can we say we love the Creator when we don't love the Creator's creation?
Yes, sir. Yes, indeed.
So, Reverend Davie, thank you for joining us today, and we're so happy that you are doing the work that you're doing. Continued blessings to you on the work that you're doing. And for everybody that's joined us on Facebook Live, I hope you will join us next week as we go to our second edition of this series, where I talk to current BJC staff members Guthrie Graves Simmons and Josiah Masters, along with 2021 BJC fellow Kristen Pitts, about working with BJC and their connection to the LGBTQ community. Thank you again, Dr. Davie, and hope our paths cross in the near future here.
Thank you. Same here.